All right, so today we're going to talk a little bit about your modeling for the grid assignment. All right, so there are two main ways that I model for the grid. I'm going to show you examples of both of these, and these examples, if you're inside of my hard surface modeling class, exist inside of your files in the examples folder on Canvas. All right, so the first example is a pretty basic version. So I'm modeling everything in meters so that it translates well over to Unreal Engine, which we're going to be moving these objects into Unreal Engine after we complete the modeling process. All right. So you'll notice that I'm starting off with very basic, very simplistic pieces. Every wall with a window and every wall with a door that you see here is based off of this initial grid, this 2 meter by 4 meter tall grid or cube. I'm taking that and I'm going to ask myself, based on the architectural style that I'm looking at, which in this case is kind of the medieval tavern, which is based heavily off of old school German, Dutch styles. I'm looking at where can I place pillars inside of these walls, supporting beams inside of these walls. I'm trying to get a wide variation on form, all right? So I can tell a nice story. Now, these particular walls are 360, which means you can walk all the way around it without seeing any back faces, right? So this isn't the most efficient way, but depending on the style of game that you're making, this is probably the better way. I also find that this is an easier way to go about it because we're more familiar with modeling for the round, all right? Or modeling in the round. Now, the other nice thing about modeling this way is even though with this current example, I've put everything on the front, you could also go ahead and start modeling on the back side. So you could have this variation with your beams all the way around plus a middle beam. And then you could come out here and you could model in a different variation on the back side. So you could have this guy right here. So if you spun this around, you'd have two different variations of wall in a single model, right? Now, this variation is also set up with its pivot point smack in the middle of the base of the object, right? So you'll notice that my model straddles my grid line for the most part, straddles the grid line in center, from the front and from the side. That means I have model on both sides of my grid line, right? But if I'm looking at it from a left and right, it lines up perfectly with that grid line. That allows me to bring this thing in and snap it to other grid sections, right? Without issue. Also rotate these. I'm using J to snap that rotation. I can start to place my objects inside of my scene and build out some sort of interior structure, right? Then I'm coming over, I'm taking my wall pieces because I know my wall chunks are going to need windows, more than likely. I don't add the window itself, but I do cut the hole for the window and add some sort of framing structure so that it's believable. All right. So here I have a small window with beams going all the way around. Notice my pivot point is still at the center. I have a large variation and I have a circular variation. Each has a slightly different build. I've also gone ahead and added the windowsill to the exterior so that I have a plain wall with my windowsill and window, plain wall with the larger window, and a plain wall with my circular window. All right, this just gives me more variation. I've then come over and done the same thing for door holes. So I have a plain version, got a really large beam header up top. It should give me some nice visual variation. I've got another version with 2 holes up top for little windows, and then another version with a circular window up top. Again, my pivot point is at the center bottom, all right, and still fits in, this entire piece still fits in to my 2 meter wide section, right? So I can still bump this in. Now, in your assignment, we talked about working in 2s, right? Factors of 2 for scaling. So that means if this and everything here is 2 meters wide, if I need to make an iteration of this, I'm going to make one that's 4 meters wide, and I probably need to make one that's 1 meter wide. Now, a 1 meter wide version isn't going to work for the door, but it will work for these walls. All right. Now, some of these could easily be scaled down. Into a 1 meter wall or 1 meter variation of that wall. Some of these are going to have to be remodeled. Things like this, you can't just come over here and grab these and start squishing them over, right? It's going to scale this entire thing down pretty poorly. Grab the wrong one. So the problem with scaling this down is it throws the aesthetic of my beams off. So now I end up with these really tiny little beams, right? Which is not what I want at all. So you would want to come in and actually remodel this guy if you were to do something along the lines of smashing these down to a 1 meter wall, if it has these vertical beams. The horizontal beams you can get away with. Then finally, I've also come over and started on a variation of pillars and beams, right? Large pillars, large beams. You'll notice I have a single beam, I have a beam with 1 support, 2 support, 3 support, and 4 support, and then a horizontal beam, of which I'll end up making probably 2 more variations of. In this particular scene, the main pieces that still remain to be made or need to be made would be a staircase. I would likely do an 8-foot tall staircase or something with probably 13 stairs, and then something with somewhere around 4 to 6 stairs so I could get halfway up and with a nice landing on top. All right, probably at minimum a 2 meter by 2 meter landing. And I would make sure that my stairs were 2 meters wide and then more than likely 4 meters deep for the full staircase, and likely 4 meters deep with a 2 by 2 landing. So I'd have 2 meters of stairs and then 2 by 2 meter landing above those stairs. And those would be really handy if you need to make angled staircases that go up and then maybe turn left or turn right. So like a boxed off spiral. All right. So the next variation is the single poly thickness wall, right? These walls are not fully three-dimensional. You can't walk around them. You're going to end up seeing back faces like so, all right? Now these walls are far more efficient in that when you import these into Unreal, Unreal does not have to calculate these back faces, right? Doesn't have to do any rendering on them, which makes the processing a good bit faster. All right, so what I'm doing here is I'm looking at floor panels. I actually like to start with floor panels when I'm doing this style of the single poly thickness. For whatever reason, it makes a lot of sense to me. And I can start to plan the layout and the pieces that I need based off of a floor plan. So I know in the floor plan that I created as a concept for these pieces, I had a lot of curved hallways. This was going to be a sci-fi or sci-fi themed or futuristic themed environment. So I wanted a lot of curvature. I wanted some interesting texture and panels inside of these floors that I could come into and start to make some really cool, there's something weird going on with the camera. I think maybe my near clip is a little too far or something. We're seeing the grid pop through. Let me turn that off. A little annoying. Okay, so what I'm doing with this is I started off with a single plane and I curved my plane to fit into that grid. All right, so I actually do have to turn this on really quick. So this grid is 2 meters wide and my piece arcs through this 2 meter by 2 meter, which means it's actually 4 meters by 4 meters to maintain that flow, right? So it's an arced version of this 2 meter by 4 meter flat plane, right? So these, I actually started this guy with a cylinder. I created a cylinder, made sure it was divisible by 4 so that I had my 4 pieces here. So it was 4 and 8 times 4, so it would have been 24, 32 piece. 32 divisions in the top. I just deleted the rest of it, so it left me with a single pie piece, right? So if I start like so, I come in here, and I grabbed all my faces, deleted those. Deleted those and deleted these. And in the process, I also added one more cap. I didn't add the cap here, but you would add one more cap division so that it gives you this line. And then I would delete those guys, right? And then you start your modeling process. So I create that plane, and then I come in and I start adding the details. Now, while these details could be added in purely with texture, I wanted to make sure that when I am texturing this, or if I were to hand this off to another person, turn this grid off again, it was really easy to see the delineations, really easy to see where my object floor panels were, where I wanted some maybe glowing lines at the edges, right? And also, it's nice to be able to see these shadows modeled directly into the object. Now, again, this is perhaps too high poly if you were to take this into a mobile game, but if you were to take this into a AAA game, it should be just fine. I'm doing the same thing to get these curves for the curved walls, and these curved walls line up with my curved floor pieces. All right, I just started off with a cylinder. I deleted the pieces I didn't need, added subdivisions, and then began to model out the wall as I needed it. I made a few variations. So I have this particular variation, which is a 4x4. And then I have a sharper wall, which is a 2x2. I have a convex and concave variation of those. I also have a really sharp wall right here, which is a 1 meter curved wall. I have variations that are set up to go below the floor in case I need to make tubes, perhaps to drop down into, or tube shafts for elevator shafts if I have circular elevator shafts, because remember, this is sci-fi. I have a few variations here where I've attached my downpipe directly to a floor piece. This allows me to pop this in without any seams. An example would be over here, right? I also notice that I've taken the Unreal Guy, because I know this is going to go into Unreal, and Unreal Guy is scaled for that world. I just export them and drop them into here, into my scene in Maya. That way I have a one-to-one comparison that I can match up with all of my wall pieces and get a feel for, are my hallways going to be wide enough? Are the holes in the floor going to be wide enough for me to drop down? I would say the holes will be fine, especially if I'm going to use some sort of teleport or something along those lines to kind of pop me up through it, or just to drop down in. Or if this is a first-person shooter, I just need to be able to see below me, then I think that'll be perfectly fine. The hallways like this, you can navigate down that, but it's a little tight, all right? Generally speaking, I like to make my hallways twice this width, right? And that's why I bring these things in here, so that I can get a feel how I'm going to be navigating, whether or not it's wide enough, whether or not these pieces are going to work perfectly. All right. Now, I did all this work in the round or rounded pieces, and then I figured, depending on where I'm at, I will likely need standard squared out corners and straight walls. So made some flat walls there, flat walls with a concaved corner. I need to make one with a convex corner as well, although generally speaking, I should be able to take two of these walls and snap them together without any real issue. But personally, I like to have a model that does that for me. Then I've also added in floor pieces that have both curved and straight areas, so that I can mix and match my set. The last thing I'm going to show you over here is my stair set and bridge pieces. Now these are modeled for the round, right? Or in the round, 360. So these can be walked around with your character without any real issue. I'm adding in all my little bracket detail to make these really jump, really pop, feel realistic. So if you're coming in here and you're walking under the staircase, it feels like a real set of stairs, right? Same with the bridge. I'm adding in some nice heavy-duty steel bracket pieces, some I-beam pieces, some squared-off tubing, and these nice, what kind of look like steel grates, all right? Notice this is still built for 2 by 4. Hit up on my keypad, it takes me up in that group. But notice where my pivot point is. Pivot point is still at the corner of this object, so that this entire object can be rotated from that corner piece. So if I need, whatever angle I need for my object there, it can be derived from that corner of the grid. But my bracket here overlaps. And the reason for that is so that if I were to duplicate this, drag this guy out, when I snap it to the grid, this bracket now functions for both pieces, right? So that bracket's now holding up both chunks of the bridge, right? So that's just thinking a little bit about the application. All right, so as I said before, these generally start off with planes or planes that I've created out of cylinders if I need that curve. You can also use your polygon disc, depending on which version of Maya you're in. You can come in here and crank out different flat objects. Now, the problem with these is the topology is a little weird. Now you can fix this to a point by coming in here and doing things like making caps, making it 4 or 6. We wanted 32 for that last one. So now you get the 32 grid pieces or 32 divisions that you would then chop out. You can fix your radius. Remember, radius is from the center to one edge. So if I have a radius of 1, I have a diameter of 2, which is all the way across. All right. Now, where am I setting my pivot points and why? On these pieces, I've added in a bevel, and this bevel sits just above the grid line. All right, it's hard to see from that angle, but you can pretty well tell from here. This bevel face sits just above the 0, 0, 0. All right. This serves 2 purposes for me. That way I can snap this floor directly to the 0, 0, 0 of the world and then start to space them out on the grid. But know that the floor itself sits just above that, so I won't clip through. All right. Also, it helps me keep all my details up and start to snap all these bits together. All right. I also like to have a little bit of an edge here, which does help keep some light from popping up through lower levels if you're not putting a framing or a blockout plane below it, all right, to keep light from popping up through. All right, also helps with textures, especially if I'm gonna do any sort of little step down for some reason. All right, so it gives me a touch of variation. All righty. Now, when you go to export anything in this scene, when we're exporting it to or for Unreal Engine, we need to make sure that we move our object, no matter where that object was modeled. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where you stuck your pivot point. If I were to export this model right now as it is, when I import it into Unreal Engine, its pivot point will be over here at the center point of what was the center point, the 0, 0, 0 point of Maya, right? So to keep that from happening, just like this object here, what I need to do is move my objects, every single one of them, to this 0, 0, 0 point, back that up, of the world, right? So you can still see my bevel is above the grid. And I'm going to take this guy, export it through File. I can use the game exporter. I tend to use export selection as an FBX, right? So use your drop down here, choose FBX, come over to this side, pan down through here. We don't need most of this stuff. Don't need constraints, cameras, lights, audio. We don't have any textures or media attached to this currently, so you can get rid of that. And then right here, FBX file format, open that up. We have binary. I tend to use the FBX 2013. I find that it's still the most stable version. And if you're kicking these out to older versions of ZBrush, you're going to need 2013. All right. So select those, name it appropriately, place all your things into a file. Ideally, you'll already have your file, your scene file structures set up in Unreal Engine so that you could just select those particular files or those folders and then drop your FBX directly into them. All right. And then those files will be ready, if you've put them into a different location, to import into your scene and then set up your collision and textures or materials. All right. If you have any questions, feel free to email me and let me know any concerns that you might have over this, or if I've skipped something, some crucial detail that's left you confused, let me know. One quick note is, in this scene, you see that I've modeled some chairs and tables, bookshelves, books, pots, those kinds of things. For our standard grid modeling, we're not going to model any of this stuff. These are set dressing pieces, accessories, which we're not interested in for our current assignment, and generally are not modeled for the grid anyway. You usually just use these as set dressings and drop them in later. All of our architectural pieces, these are what we're going to use the grid-based system for. That way we can snap together an environment in short amount of time, just like a giant Lego kit. All right? All right. Good luck and